Hi, this is Sandra Kearney, and I'm here with Bas de Groot, the Records and Archive Manager at Flinders University. And he's going to talk to us today about personal archives and the archives of club associations. Over to you, Bas.
Okay, thank you. Records are basically everything that is created, of which a part then later on become archives. So records are basically the recording of either a transaction, so I buy something or I do something, and that is recorded. And if you look at personal archives, it is more the things that I, as a person, go through, experience, and that I also record. So if I am on holidays, I make a picture of where I am, then really that is a record of where I am, and etc. So that's where the word record comes from. If you look at personal records, then most of the time they are linked to, well, obviously personal experience, but also quite often a personal timeline. There are records of when you are born. There are records of when you had your 5th birthday. There are records when you start primary school, when you start secondary school, when you get married, so throughout your life, your whole, basically the timeline of your life, there are moments in your life that mean something to you and possibly even to others around you. And we tend to, as humans, we tend to make records of those moments. Those moments might be small, like I said. If it's just a holiday, I still might take snaps and I still might keep a diary. But even then, it is something that has a meaning for you as a person. That meaning then also gives the value to records, and it then also has an effect on how long we want to keep them. Humans tend to be hoarders. not all of us, but a lot of us tend to hoard things. Why? Because a lot of things have meaning to us. They were created, or they remind us of a certain moment in our lives, and that is also very important to keep in mind, is that most of your personal records, the value of that will be created by context. So if you don't have the context, then you don't really know what the value of such a record is. So if I take a happy snap during a holiday and of a landscape, there might be 10 other tourists around me making the same snap of the same landscape. So it's not so much the picture of the landscape that has really great value, but to me as a person, it reminds me of a moment in time which may or may not have been important to me. Like it might have been, say, the last holiday that I took with my kids, or it might have been the first holiday that I took with my future wife, or something like that. So context is really important to the value of records, and therefore also for how long we then keep those records. That's called retention. I'll get back to that in a moment. When we look at organizing those records, I would always suggest, especially if it's purely personal records, to basically attach them to milestones or key moments in your life. If you want to set up a personal archive, you can simply start making a folder tree which is based on those milestones of your own life. If you have it's like a box of photographs and you want to make a digital archive, scan them in. If it's a picture of your fifth birthday, put it in the folder fifth birthday, something like that. And that's chronologically that is the easiest way of documenting your life, and therefore creating an archive out of the records that you have. Retention is important though, and context, and I'll come to context first. Is that if I when I create such an archive and I say I use a folder tree, then the titles of the folders will already give an indication of what the context is. However, if I have 100 photographs in that folder, I don't know which is going to be which. So not only does the folder give context, but also the title of each individual photograph that I give it gives context. And it helps me to differentiate between all of the different records that I have. So titling and providing context to records is really important to understand what they are about, and to find the particular one later on if you want to retrieve them and show them to other people. The other one is that, especially in these days of digital information, where we are now creating so much digital information. Like every time I walk around with my phone and I basically sort of take a snap, that is a photograph. When I first visited Australia, because I'm originally from the Netherlands, when I first visited Australia back in 2001, my wife and I just had an analog camera. So, and over the course of 2 months, we created the whole of 360 photographs. Whereas nowadays, I mean, I know some people that would create that much in a week. And especially with social media, with all the things that we create a massive amount of pictorial records. Weeding them and with another word, so the disposal of records that you don't need is becoming more and more of an issue. Because in the old days, I mean, out of those 360 photographs, I reckon I still have around, say, 150 to 200 in 3 big albums. Those 3 albums go onto a shelf. If I were to do the same with all of the photographs on my camera, on my phone these days, then I would be filling shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf with all of those pictures. And the same really is true of your digital repository. Even if I put them online, in an online repository, then it eats up space. It's not being used quite often, and over time they quickly lose their value because you don't know how to retrieve them. You don't know whether you want to keep them or not. So it becomes a bit of a mess. So therefore, if you have correctly titled your photographs, you will know which ones are good, and especially if you, after you've taken a number of photographs, immediately go through your phone and say, that one's no good, that one's no good, that one's no good. Delete them straight away. That's my advice. But hey, if you're a hoarder, if you like taking pictures, go for it. But it then becomes, the more material we have, the more we need to make it manageable over time. And for that, context is important. And the other bit is then retention. Some records, like those photographs, you might want to keep for the rest of your life, and you might even want your successors to have access to those photographs. Others, you go like, it's nice. It was a good holiday to remember, but hey, we're done with it. So it makes sense to, over time, go through your records and get rid of the ones that you don't want or need. If it is purely personal records, then most of the time there is no set retention period, so there is no period during which you have to keep them. Once we start looking at records of an organization, like a club or an association or your workplace, then most likely there will be more stringent rules in place. So, as I alluded to previously, there is a difference between your purely personal records and the records of the club or the association that you might be working with. Purely personal records, one is they might be about anything, really, and two, most of the time they tend to have they tend to be kept for as long as you personally think it is important. Once you start looking at the records of an association or a club or any organization that you work in, things do change a little. And that is because those records don't only have a personal meaning for you anymore, but also for the other people that are in the club or in the association and that might have to work with those records as well. So it becomes slightly more professional in that sense. So any club or association will have will have three basic types of records. So the first one is the records that deal with the existence of the club and its really high-level strategic type of documents. So if you're incorporated, it might be your ABR, it is your constitution, your bylaws, your internal rules, and also the records about your governing body. So if you've got like a council, it would be council minutes. If you've got like just a committee, then it would be committee records, which basically sort of set out what legal rights, what sort of entity your club is and has, and how high-level decisions are made. That's sort of your first category of club records. And the second one is, okay, what is your club or association about? Why are you there? Why is your organization there? What is its purpose? So all of the records that deal with the reason why your club is there, in the sense of say, if we are a club, if we're a football club, then really we're a sports club, and our primary function is to make that sport happen. If we are a football club, it's about making sure that people come into the club, put on a club uniform, go out and play matches, or organize tournaments, or etc. That's your primary function. If you're a historical society, then say your primary function would be to do research of your local area, publish articles, publish a newsletter, give talks about your local area. So that is, for any organization, there will be a one or more primary functions. Records that are about those types of events or things that you organize, things that you do, that is the second category of records. And then the third category is really all of the records that support that primary function. How do we run a club? Well, we need some financial records because we need to pay bills, we might get in grant money, we need to pay taxes or receive tax benefits, that sort of thing. Then some of our members, or if we're an organization, might even be staff. They would have HR records. Similarly, if we are a completely volunteer-run organization, you would still have volunteer records. So that's your HR component. Some associations or clubs might even have an OHS component of records. IT, property, if you have any, like collections, or if you own and manage and restore a building, that might be property as well. So those are the support functions of the organization. So strategic, primary function, support function. That really is the basic three types of records that any club or association has. And the best way to organize your records is exactly in that way. So if, say, you want to set up a folder tree somewhere on a hard drive or in an online repository to organize and archive your records, set up your own archive, then you'd have strategic function, primary function, support function, and then all of those would have sub-folders, sub-classifications under that. The good way of doing that is that you can also start to think about how long do I want to keep all of those records. And that's where the term retention comes in. Retention is how long do I retain, therefore how long do I keep a particular record. And that is the decisions about that is usually made based on what they call a disposal document. So a disposal document sets out if it is a strategic type of record, so maybe your council minutes or your committee minutes or etc., then we want to keep them forever and ever because it is really important because it documents how our club was being run, our association was being run. If it's photographs of this big event that we organized and we had a lot of, it showed a lot of our members and what we were doing, etc., then those types of records you would keep for very long periods of time. You would keep them permanently. Then there are types of records where you go, that receipt for that particular going back to the football club, 3 footballs that we bought back in 2013, there's no point in keeping that. Really, the ATO is only interested in any financial records for about 5 years after your club has done its financial accounts. So after 5 years, get rid of it. Don't keep it. There's no point. And the same you can do with that digital folder tree. So if I have records of a support function, say some financial records that are in there that date back to 2013. It's longer than 5 years. There's no reason to keep them. So that's how you can, if you set up your archives according to that strategic primary function, support function, you can then start looking at the individual folders, and of any particular individual folder, say, okay, that's been done and dusted by. There's no newer records rather than 2015. Disposal document says keep for 5 years, therefore delete. So that's how you arrange on a larger scale for a club or an association your disposal of your records. Disposal of records really gives your club more efficiency. So that means that your club officials or your association's officials don't need to trawl through all sorts of records from years and years ago, but they can just get down to what they need quickly and make the decisions that they need to without any further fuss or anything. They don't need to search for everything. And at the same time, if depending on how big the storage is that your association requires, it might actually bring down storage costs as well. So for a lot of organisations, that isn't too much of an issue. But the more digital records we build over time, I can guarantee you storage costs will go up, just like with physical storage costs. So over time, it really pays off to make sure that you do this annual disposal round and say, okay, what stuff can we get rid of that this year is now the final year of retention, and we can get rid of for now. So that's sort of the initial idea about how you set up and how you dispose of your club and archive records. And always think about records management as in terms of risk what can go wrong if I no longer have this record, and on the other hand, value. So what is the value to my club, my association, me personally, if we still keep this information? And that's always a good idea to keep in the back of your mind. But especially if you're in a club or an association, try and make a disposal document for your club. And there are plenty of archivists and records managers who are more than happy to help out in you doing that.
And there might be some websites and links that we can add to this that will take people to some of those handy hints and tips that you mentioned.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
especially with the disposal schedule, we can put a link on for that, and that will give people some guidance.
Yes, absolutely. Yep,
Okay, great. Thank you, Bas.